Commander Tyke stood at the observation window, his scaled fingers tapping nervously against the metal railing. The meeting chamber below was prepared with careful attention to every detail. Atmospheric composition adjusted to Earth standards, temperature set precisely at 21 degrees Celsius, and lighting dimmed to accommodate human visual comfort. "They've arrived," announced Senior Analyst Jiwoo, her voice barely above a whisper. 5 humans entered the chamber, led by Ambassador Hana Kim, a woman of medium height with straight black hair cut just below her shoulders. The Galactic Confederacy had spent nearly a full Earth year studying human communication patterns before attempting this first official contact. "Remember," Tyke cautioned his team, "no sudden movements during the greeting ritual. Their cultural attachments require at least 15 minutes of preliminary conversation before business discussions." The alien delegation entered from the opposite door. 3 Meridians with their characteristic blue skin, a tall Vexari ambassador, and 2 translator drones hovering silently above. What happened next stunned the observation team into silence. Ambassador Hana smiled, executed a perfect Meridian greeting bow, and immediately asked, "Shall we get started with the trade proposal? No 15 minutes of formalities. No careful dance of cultural exchange. That's not in the protocol," whispered research specialist Doyen, frantically checking his datapad. "They're supposed to exchange pleasantries about planetary weather patterns first." The alien delegation appeared equally confused. The lead Meridian, Ambassador Sonam, blinked his 3 eyes in rapid succession, a sign of disorientation. "Human Kim," Sonam began carefully, "perhaps we should first discuss the symbolic significance of our meeting before addressing practical matters." "Of course, if you prefer," Hana replied with another smile. "But my team is ready to review terms whenever you are. We received your preliminary documents yesterday and have already prepared our response." Tyke's mandibles clicked in surprise. "Already prepared? The documents were sent as pre-meeting review materials. No species responds without at least 3 days of internal consultation." Below, the meeting continued with the aliens attempting to follow their carefully planned diplomatic sequence, while the humans repeatedly moved the conversation toward action items and decisions. When Ambassador Sonam presented the trade agreement draft, a document the Confederacy expected would be taken back to Earth for months of review, the observation team watched in astonishment as Hana and her team huddled for 5 minutes, whispered among themselves, and then straightened up. "We accept the terms with 2 minor adjustments," Hana announced, pulling out a stylus and marking the document. Analyst Jiwoo nearly dropped her recording device. "They're making decisions right now? Without consulting their government?" The aliens in the meeting room looked equally shocked. Ambassador Sonam's skin rippled in confusion, a physiological response his species displayed when encountering unexpected situations. "Ambassador Kim," he said carefully, "perhaps you misunderstand. This document is for your preliminary review. The Confederacy expects your world government to analyze it for at least 1 standard rotation cycle before providing initial feedback." Hana looked puzzled. "Why wait? I have authorization to negotiate and close this agreement. These terms work for Earth with just these small changes. If you agree, we can sign today." The observation room erupted in murmurs. "Is this a negotiation tactic?" asked Junior Observer Bin. "Are they trying to destabilize the standard diplomatic process?" Tyke shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. Their facial expressions and body language suggest genuine confusion at our confusion." When an unexpected power fluctuation caused the room's environmental systems to falter, dropping the temperature by 10 degrees, the alien delegation froze, in place. Standard procedure was to call for technical assistance and reschedule the meeting. Instead, the humans simply removed their outer garments, continued talking, and Ambassador Hana even walked to the wall panel herself, pressing buttons, until she found the manual override. "Problem solved," she said casually, returning to her seat. By the end of the meeting, not only had the humans agreed to modified trade terms, they had also proposed 3 additional cooperation initiatives, accepted an invitation to the Confederate assembly, and scheduled follow-up meetings, all without once saying they needed to check with authorities back home. As the delegations departed, Tyke turned to his stunned research team. This species makes decisions without full information cycles. They act without questioning. Is that dangerous? Asked Jiwoo. Tyke watched the humans laughing as they left. Perhaps. Or perhaps it's exactly what the Confederacy has been missing for the last 1,000 years. The emergency alert chimed throughout the Confederate Council chamber, causing the holographic displays to flash red. Council Representative Miri rose from her cushioned seat, her 4 tentacles instinctively arranging themselves in the pattern of official concern. "Attention council members," she announced, her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "We have received reports of a stellar anomaly in Sector 7. 3 colonial outposts are potentially in danger." The massive chamber, with its 200 representatives from across the galaxy, hummed with low murmurs. This was the proper response. Measured concern followed by careful deliberation. "The stellar flare appears to be releasing radiation beyond predicted models," explained Science Director Sungo, his scaled fingers manipulating the central display to show the affected region. "We should form an assessment committee immediately." Lieutenant Jae-won, recently appointed as the first human liaison to the Confederate Council, leaned forward in his seat. Unlike the aliens around him, his posture showed visible tension. "How many people are in danger?" he asked. "Approximately 20,000 settlers," replied Sung-ho. "But we need to verify these readings before." 20,000? Jae-hwan interrupted, standing abruptly. "What evacuation measures have been initiated?" The council chamber fell silent. Interruptions during formal proceedings were considered deeply inappropriate. "Lieutenant," said Miri gently, "we must first establish a proper analysis sequence. The radiation signatures must be verified, potential trajectories calculated, and then a response committee will draft recommendations." Jae-won stared at her in disbelief. "How long will that take?" "With proper diligence, perhaps 7 to 10 days, Sung-ho answered. "People could be dying right now," Jae-won said, his voice rising. He tapped the communication device on his wrist. "This is Lieutenant Jae-won. Connect me to Earth Central Command." Miri's tentacles twisted in alarm. "What are you doing? This council has not authorized external communications about this matter." But Jae-hwan was already speaking rapidly into his device. "This is Lieutenant Jae-hwan. We have a radiation emergency in Confederate Sector 7. Request immediate humanitarian response. Yes. Yes. 3 settlements. Sending coordinates now." The council erupted in protest. Procedure was being violated, protocols ignored, proper channels bypassed. 6 hours later, as the council was still debating the formation of an assessment team, the first alerts came through. Human ships had entered Confederate space, heading directly toward the affected colonies. "They can't do this," exclaimed Representative Hoon, his crystalline features reflecting the red emergency lights. No response has been authorized. The council gathered around the tracking displays, watching in astonishment as 3 Earth vessels approached the radiation zone. When the ships reached the outer edges of the flare's effect, they didn't stop to take measurements or deploy sensor probes as Confederate protocol required. They flew straight in. "They'll be destroyed," whispered Sung-ho. "The radiation shields on those vessels can't possibly—" The observation screens showed the human ships deploying what appeared to be makeshift radiation barriers, constructed from what looked like modified cargo containers and emergency supplies. "What are they doing?" asked Miri, her voice a mixture of horror and fascination. "Those aren't regulation radiation shields." "They're improvising," said a young Confederate officer named Suho, who had been studying human tactics. "It's what they do." For the next 12 hours, the council watched as the human ships evacuated colonists, delivered medical supplies, and established temporary radiation shelters. They worked without pausing, without committee approval, without complete data. When the first ship returned to Confederate space, Lieutenant Jae-won requested permission for the human commander to address the council. Permission was reluctantly granted. Commander Nari Park stood before the council, her uniform singed and dirty. Unlike the council members, She hadn't taken time to clean up or prepare formal remarks. "We've evacuated the most vulnerable colonists," she reported simply. "Our medics have treated over 200 for radiation exposure. We've established temporary shelters with the supplies we brought." "You acted without authorization," Miri stated, her tentacles now arranged in the pattern of formal disapproval. "Without complete data analysis, without proper risk assessment." Commander Park looked tired but resolute. "While you were still debating whether to form a committee, people were already showing radiation sickness. We saw a need and we acted." "But how did you know your improvised shields would work?" asked Sung-ho, genuinely curious. "We didn't," Commander Park admitted. "But we calculated they had a good chance, and doing something imperfect was better than doing nothing perfect." The council chamber was silent. The concept was so foreign to them it took moments to process. "You risked your lives. On a chance?" asked Miri finally. "Yes," answered Park simply. "That's what humans do." As she left the chamber, the Confederate representatives looked at each other in stunned silence. These humans were either the most foolish or the most courageous species they had ever encountered. Xenopsychologist Giwan adjusted the lighting in the research chamber as 30 of the Confederacy's most brilliant minds settled into their observation pods. 3 months had passed since the humans' unsanctioned rescue mission, and the Confederate Scientific Council had finally approved a formal study of human decision-making processes. "Today we begin our comprehensive analysis of human cognitive patterns," Gaiwan announced, his tall, slender frame silhouetted against the large display screen behind him.
Specifically their unusual ability to act without complete information. The audience, representing 12 different species from across the Confederacy, watched with rapt attention. This mysterious human trait had become the most discussed
topic in scientific circles. Historian Yunha stepped forward, her scaled skin reflecting the blue light of the holographic projector. "To understand humans, we must first understand ourselves," she began. "The founding species of the Confederacy evolved on worlds with stable environments and predictable threats." The display showed peaceful scenes from various Confederate homeworlds. The calm seas of Meridia, the stable weather patterns of Vexar Prime, the predictable seasonal cycles of Quaneth. "Our ancestors had time," Yuna continued. "Time to observe, time to build consensus, time to perfect their responses to challenges. Those who acted hastily often perished, while those who planned carefully survived." The audience nodded in understanding. This was basic evolutionary science. "Humans," Yuna said, tapping her control pad, "evolved under very different circumstances." The display shifted to show Earth, unpredictable weather systems, volatile tectonic activity, and a startling variety of predator species. Their world demanded split-second decisions, explained Giwan, stepping forward again. A human ancestor who stopped to analyze all possible outcomes when facing a predator didn't survive to reproduce. The ones who acted quickly, even with incomplete information, passed on their genes. The screen showed a series of images from human history: people evacuating before volcanic eruptions, sailors making rapid course corrections during storms, ancient hunters making split-second decisions during dangerous hunts. "But surely this produces catastrophic failure rates," objected senior researcher Subin, his eye stalks quivering with concern. "Indeed," agreed Gaiwan. "Human history is filled with both miraculous successes and terrible mistakes, often resulting from the same trait." The display now showed paired examples: a human military commander making a bold, successful strategy alongside another, whose similar decision led to disaster. Emergency responders saving lives through quick action next to cases where hasty intervention caused harm. Psychologist Minjun, who had spent time studying at an Earth university, raised her hand. "The fascinating element is that humans accept this risk. They have a saying, 'Perfect is the enemy of good.' They would rather act on good enough information than wait for perfect knowledge." The room filled with murmurs. The concept was almost physically uncomfortable to many present. Confederate species measured their worth by precision and certainty. "We've constructed a series of decision-making simulations," announced Giwan. "We've run them with both Confederate volunteers and human participants. The results are illuminating. The display showed comparison data. Confederate participants consistently gathered more information, considered more variables, and reached more accurate conclusions when given unlimited time. Human participants made decisions with far less information but acted significantly faster. But here's the crucial discovery, Giwan said, highlighting a particular data set. When time constraints were introduced, human error rates remained relatively stable while Confederate performance collapsed dramatically. Yunha added, in environments with incomplete information and time pressure, humans consistently outperformed Confederate participants, not because their decisions were objectively better, but because they made decisions at all. The chamber grew quiet as the implications sank in. There's something else, said Minjun softly. Something we didn't expect to find. She activated her own display, showing brain scans of both human and Confederate subjects. Humans experience something they call intuition, a decision-making process that occurs below conscious awareness. Their brains process patterns from past experiences and generate feelings that guide action, without the person being able to explain why they know something. That's disturbing, whispered someone in the audience. Perhaps, acknowledged Minjun, but also remarkable. While we carefully construct logical frameworks, humans have evolved systems that process information too complex for their conscious minds to handle. Giwan stepped to the center of the chamber. The Confederacy has spent millennia perfecting the art of careful deliberation. We pride ourselves on making the right decision, every time with complete information. He paused, looking around the room. But the universe rarely provides complete information. Sometimes waiting for perfect clarity means waiting too long. One of the oldest members present, Research Director Hyun, spoke for the first time. Are you suggesting we should become more human in our thinking? I'm suggesting, Giwan replied, carefully, that there might be wisdom in both approaches. The human capacity for decisive action in uncertain conditions is exactly what the Confederacy lacks, and perhaps what we need for the challenges ahead. As the session ended, the researchers left in thoughtful silence. For beings who had evolved to seek certainty, embracing uncertainty might be the most difficult adaptation of all. The quantum rift appeared without warning. At first, the Confederate monitoring stations classified it as a minor space-time anomaly, the kind that occasionally formed and dissipated throughout the galaxy. But this one didn't dissipate. It grew. By the time the full Confederate Council convened for emergency session, the rift had expanded to cover 3 light minutes of space. The massive council chamber, usually a model of order and decorum, now hummed with anxious energy. The data is troubling, Chief Counselor Minkyu announced, his crystalline features catching the light as he gestured toward the central holographic display. The rift exhibits exponential growth patterns. Our models suggest it could threaten the Vega sector within 12 standard days. Ambassador Hana from Earth studied the projection with a frown. She had been part of the Confederacy's diplomatic corps for 3 years now, yet still found herself frustrated by their deliberative pace. Beside her sat Science Liaison Deho, another human who had earned respect among Confederate scientists for his innovative thinking. What options are being considered? Hana asked. We have formed 3 analysis committees, Minkyu replied. The first is examining the quantum properties of the rift. The second is modeling potential growth scenarios. The third is evaluating theoretical containment measures. And when will they report their findings? Asked Deho. Initial reports are scheduled for 3 days from now, with final recommendations perhaps a week after that. Hana and Deho exchanged alarmed glances. The rift will have doubled in size by then, Hana said, keeping her voice carefully controlled. There are 17 million people in its projected path. Minkyu's features shifted to the pattern indicating patient explanation. Yes, Ambassador. That is why we must be thorough in our analysis. A hasty, incorrect response could accelerate the damage. For the next 4 hours, the Council debated which additional experts to consult, which historical records might contain relevant information, and whether to form a 4th committee focused on evacuation logistics. During a brief recess, Hana pulled Deho aside. They're going to analyze this problem until it swallows half the sector. she whispered. Deho nodded. I've been studying the rift's quantum signature. It's similar to an experiment we ran at Earth Science Academy last year. We created a smaller version and successfully collapsed it using a resonance field generator. Could that work here? Hana asked, her eyes wide. Possibly, but scaled up significantly. I'd need access to a Class 5 generator and permission to modify it. Hana's expression hardened. The Confederate Science Division has 3 such generators in this system. Yes, but getting authorization to use one would take weeks of— We don't have weeks, Hana interrupted. She glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. What if we didn't ask for permission? The shock on Deho's face gradually transformed into determination. Meet me in Lab Section 7 after the session ends. Bring Technician Junho, he owes me a favor. When the council reconvened, discussions had turned to the ethical implications of various theoretical solutions. Should they prioritize property or cultural artifacts during evacuation? What level of certainty was required before attempting intervention? What precedents might their decisions set for future crises? As the debate continued, Hana and Daiho quietly slipped from the chamber. 12 hours later, deep in the restricted area of Confederate Science Division, Hana watched as Daiho and Junho made final adjustments to the modified generator. They had borrowed the device using Junho's access codes and Daiho's technical knowledge. This is treason by Confederate law, Junho said nervously, his hands still making precise adjustments to the quantum calibrator. Only if we fail, Hana replied, though she knew the statement wasn't strictly true. If we succeed, they'll be too relieved to press charges. The modifications are complete, Daiho announced. We need a vessel to transport it to the optimal deployment point. Already arranged, said Hana. A human science ship is standing by. 6 hours later, their small vessel approached the edge of the rift. Through the view screen, it looked like a tear in the fabric of space itself, a wound in reality leaking strange energies. Are we certain about this? Junho asked, staring at the rift with wide eyes. No, admitted Daiho. The math suggests a 70% chance of success. There's a 20% chance it does nothing, and a 10% chance it accelerates the rift's growth. Those aren't great odds, Junho whispered. Better than a 100% chance of doing nothing while millions die, Hana replied firmly. Daiho activated the modified generator. The ship shuddered as energy built up in its core. Deployment in 3, 2, 1. The generator released a focused beam of quantum-resonant energy directly into the heart of the rift. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rift began to pulse, its edges fluctuating wildly. Is it working? Hana asked, gripping her seat. I think, Daiho began, but was interrupted as the rift suddenly flared brilliantly, then collapsed in on itself, leaving only empty space where the anomaly had been. The alarms that had been blaring throughout Confederate space for days suddenly fell silent. When they returned to Confederate headquarters, they were met not with gratitude, but with a security detail. Chief Counselor Minkyu himself waited, his crystalline features arranged in the pattern of severe disapproval. You violated 17 Confederate laws, he stated. You stole restricted equipment, modified it without approval, and implemented an untested solution. A solution that worked, Hana replied calmly. You risked everything on a 70% probability, Minkyu continued. What if you had been wrong? Then we would have failed trying, rather than succeeded at doing nothing, Daiho answered. Minkyu's features shifted almost imperceptibly to a pattern rarely seen in Confederate officials. Uncertainty. The council will need to deliberate. On your actions, he finally said. Behind him, the emergency displays showed updated projections. 17 million lives no longer at risk. No committee required to count that number. 6 months after the quantum rift incident, Training Director Ji-hoon stood in the observation room overlooking what had once been unthinkable. A joint Confederate human emergency response team running crisis drills. He watched with careful attention as the mixed group worked through a simulated planetary disaster. Integration Team 6 is showing remarkable progress, he noted to his assistant, tapping data points on his tablet. Their response time has improved. by 32% since the program began. Down in the training arena, a human officer named Captain Minji was working alongside a tall Vexari coordinator. Instead of following the traditional Confederate protocol of establishing multiple analysis committees, they had developed a hybrid approach: rapid assessment, followed by decisive action, but with careful monitoring and adjustment. The key breakthrough was psychological, explained Admiral Tech, entering the observation room quietly. Once a skeptical researcher studying human behavior, he now led the integration initiative. We had to train both sides to overcome their instinctive responses. On the training floor, Minji pointed to a holographic display showing a simulated atmospheric contamination spreading across a city. "We need to act now," she urged. "The main population center will be affected within 3 hours." Her Vexari partner, Lieutenant Wu Jin, nodded but raised a scaled hand. "Agreed. But first, what are the 3 highest probability outcomes of our intervention?" This simple exchange represented months of careful training. The human didn't immediately rush to action without analysis, and the Confederate didn't insist on exhaustive study before making any move. "They've found balance," Ji-hoon observed with something approaching pride. "Neither completely human nor completely Confederate in approach." Admiral Taek nodded. "The humans taught us that perfect information is often impossible, while we taught them that some analysis prevents catastrophic mistakes. Both lessons were painful. The first mixed response teams had failed spectacularly. Humans grew frustrated with what they perceived as needless delay, while Confederate team members were horrified by what seemed like reckless action. Arguments erupted, missions failed, and many believed the initiative would be abandoned. Instead, something unexpected happened. Both sides began to adapt. In the training arena, the team had now deployed their response to the simulated crisis. When one approach showed signs of failure, they quickly shifted to an alternative without lengthy debate or recrimination. They moved with purpose, but not panic, gathering essential data without becoming paralyzed by analysis. "Watch how they communicate," said Ji-hoon, pointing to a human technician named Seojun who was working with a Meridian scientist. "The human uses abbreviated updates, just enough information to make decisions. The Meridian provides critical analysis but doesn't overwhelm with unnecessary details." A small alarm sounded in the simulation, indicating a new complication. In the past, this would have triggered a full Confederate reassessment or a hasty human reaction. Instead, the team quickly gathered, exchanged essential information, and adjusted their approach without breaking stride. "We're seeing something new emerge," said Tyke thoughtfully. "Neither species could have developed this approach alone. It required both evolutionary perspectives." As the training session concluded successfully, team members gathered for evaluation. There was none of the formal distance that typically characterized Confederate interactions, nor the casual backslapping of humans. Instead, they exhibited a focused camaraderie, respectful but warm, efficient but not cold. Later that evening, Admiral Tyke sat in his office reviewing the final report from his original research project, the study that had begun 3 years earlier when humans first stunned the Confederacy with their willingness to act without questioning. He added his concluding observations. "When our species first encountered humans, we saw only recklessness. We failed to recognize that their decisiveness evolved for survival, just as our caution did. The quantum rift crisis demonstrated both the danger and value of the human approach. Without their willingness to act despite uncertainty, millions would have perished while we deliberated. But the humans have learned from us as well. Their hasty actions have sometimes caused harm that more careful analysis might have prevented. The strength of our new approach comes not from one species dominating the other, but from the synthesis of our different evolutionary paths." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Perhaps the most surprising outcome has been how quickly both species adapted once we recognized the value in each other's approach. Young Confederate officers now show a readiness to act that would have been unthinkable just years ago. Human team members demonstrate analytical patience their predecessors would have mocked. Most telling is the emergence of officers like Captain Minji, the first Confederate to graduate from Earth's Crisis Management Academy, who embody both traditions. She gathers essential data swiftly, yet acts before certainty is absolute. She represents what neither evolution alone could produce. Tyke finished his report and submitted it immediately, without sending it to committee for review, a small but meaningful change that would have been unimaginable before humans joined the Confederacy. Outside his window, the stars shone on, a galaxy facing countless unknown threats. For the first time in his long career, Tyke felt they might be ready to face them, not by questioning or acting, but by knowing when to do each.